London Mayor saying, "I've never known economic pain like now." Philip Shaw is the chief UK economist at Investec. He joins me now. Philip, great to have you on the show. We've heard so much today about Liz's bold plan. She herself's calling it a bold plan. We're expecting to hear more of it in the next week or so. Before you tell us, what her plan may include, what does it need to include? What does it need to be there in terms of policy?
Well, okay, I think there's general acceptance that there needs to be a degree of protection for consumers facing an 80% hike in their domestic energy bills. And that comes on top, as we've heard, of a 54% rise in April as well, and particularly the needy and the vulnerable will be in need of income support or price reduction. So that's generally accepted. And of course for businesses, and that's often neglected, that small businesses in particular are going to find themselves squeezed, and businesses don't have the benefit of a price cap as well. So that we'd expect something fairly radical and fairly large to help those groups of people. On top of that, what Ms Truss has been talking about is a fairly large shopping list of tax reductions, and they would include, for example, reversing the national insurance contributions increase in April, which was raised by 1.25 percentage points, and abolishing a 6p increase in corporation tax next April. There are others on top of that. The danger is, I think, from a financial market or an investor point of view, is that it's too bold. In other words, you're adding too much to demand and potentially inflation just when the Bank of England is raising rates to try and quell inflation, and also that, as you mentioned earlier on, how is this all going to be funded? Yeah,
that is the big question. It's bold. She clearly wants to try and keep the economy growing, whilst obviously pleasing every side, every sector of the country. But the concern is, where is she going to get the money for this? Because that's just, as Anna was pointing out, that's just going to add, of course, to the cost of borrowing. And with with the consumer price lower, that has a huge impact on how people see the country and investment in the country.
That's right. If the tax stimulus package is too great, the Bank of England will simply say, well, that's adding to inflation, it's not really going to add to growth.
Yeah.
And therefore what you will see is interest rates rising, perhaps not as far as 2.5% as we're currently forecasting at the moment, but perhaps to 4% or above. And that itself will cause pain to both households and businesses. So in a way, cutting taxes by too much is going to be counterproductive.
Well, Rishi Sunak, her rival, of course, he had a very different vision in terms of cuts, and he actually said that her vision, Liz Truss's, was not fair. Do you think, in terms of cutting taxes, do you think that's fair?
Well, I think it's fantastic to have an aspiration of cutting taxes, and Ms Truss sees herself as a new Margaret Thatcher. When Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979, she did begin to cut income taxes, but wanted to cut them to 25p in the pound from, I think they were originally about 33p. So we had a small cut in income taxes in her first year or two, but it took her something like another 9 years to achieve what she wanted to.
She doesn't have that long, though.
Well, that's the great precedent, isn't it? That you have an aspiration and you reduce taxes, when it's prudent to do so.
So, what you're telling me, what you sound like, her aspiration, it sounds like she's not going to be able to deliver on all this, right? Is that what you're telling me? That she's going to have to pick what is the most fundamental need right now?
I think if the choice is between a modest set of tax reductions and, of course, help to households and businesses, and interest rates rising just a little bit, or a massive cut in taxes and interest rates rising sharply, then the prudent course of action would be to say, well, here's a little tax cut, we'll save some in reserve for later when it's safe to do so, and actually when the public finances arguably are in a better state to afford a tax cut.
What do you think, Philip, her relationship will be with the Bank of England? Because just from what we've heard in terms of campaigning, because she wanted to kind of change the mandate, didn't she? At least hinted at that during much of her campaigning. What do you think we'll see from her?
We don't know, and that's one of the big unknowns about what the government's going to do with the Bank of England. We did hear about changing the mandate. Of course, the Bank of England on the monetary policy side is mandated to reach an inflation rate of 2% at all times. Of course, it's 10.1 at the moment. That's why the Bank of England's raising interest rates. More recently, I think Ms Truss has hinted that actually the Bank of England's independence is sacrosanct. and that won't be reversed. So it's a big question mark, but I think she's moved to reassure investors that what we might have seen is some elements of the Bank of England's independence to set interest rates will be removed. It seems that the direction of travel is not to do that at the
Very
moment.
quickly, Philip, how soon does she have to get this bold plan in action? So it can be felt. How quickly does that need to happen?
Well, I'd be surprised if she and some advisors hadn't already been thinking about it. We don't need to know full granularity straight away, but an idea of the direction, some of the main points and the extent of the plan would be pretty helpful and fairly reassuring for investors to know those points over the next few days.
Philip Shaw, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My
Thanks
pleasure.
for coming in. Well, Russia